The midday sun blazed mercilessly over the Gaza border, where silence often felt more dangerous than noise. In a gray, abandoned building on the edge of no man's land, 10 elite Israeli female soldiers had been stationed overnight under strict orders: observe, report, and remain silent. No communication, no questions. Among them stood Lieutenant Lena Sharon, only 24, yet already hardened by years of military indoctrination. Lena had always been the perfect soldier, precise, obedient, and emotionally detached. The daughter of a retired intelligence officer, and a mother who raised her to believe that weakness was a betrayal. She had learned to lock her emotions behind the thickest armor. But deep inside, something had begun to fracture. Orders had become too vague, too cruel, and this mission, too quiet. She stood near the shattered window on the 3rd floor, staring toward Gaza. From this distance, the city seemed like a blur of broken rooftops and distant minarets. Suddenly, a memory flashed, her father, years ago, whispering into a phone, saying, "If we need sympathy, we manufacture it." Lena shook it off. She wasn't here to think. Below, 2 teammates patrolled the lower corridor. Others tried to rest against crumbling walls. The building groaned with the weight of silence. Then, at 2:03 p.m., the floor exploded beneath her. The sound came not like a thunderclap but like the scream of the earth itself. A shockwave ripped through concrete and flesh. Dust turned to night. Screams were muffled by debris. Lena felt herself hurled backward, her head smashing against the steel beam. Then blackness. When she awoke, it was impossible to tell how long she'd been unconscious. Her ears rang. Her left arm was drenched in blood, barely responsive. Around her, the floor was torn open, a jagged hole where her unit had once stood. No gunfire. No enemy attack. No drone overhead. Just silence. Only one explanation surfaced in her mind. We were never meant to return. With the strength of sheer terror, she dragged herself across broken tiles and steel shards. Her boot tore on rebar. A concrete chunk cut her side. But she kept crawling. Her eyes watered not from pain, but from betrayal. The army she served had turned on its own. By nightfall, she managed to escape the ruins. She had no weapon, no food, no radio, just a blood-soaked uniform and a name stitched to her chest plate, L. Sharon. As she staggered away from the building, she instinctively avoided returning toward the Israeli side. Something inside her rebelled at the idea. Instead, she turned south, toward Gaza. Her vision blurred. Her knees buckled. In the dim alleys of a bombed-out neighborhood, where stray cats scattered and burned-out cars lined the street, Lena collapsed beside a crumbled stone wall. That's where he found her. A boy. No older than 10. His skin dusty, his clothes torn, and his eyes too tired for his age. He carried a cloth bag over his shoulder, filled with water bottles and small bandages. He paused when he saw her, bloodied, in uniform, with the Star of David barely visible on her scorched ear. For a moment, the world froze. Then he stepped closer. Lena, barely conscious, weakly raised her hand. "Don't come near," she croaked in English. But the boy didn't flinch. Instead, he knelt down beside her and opened his bag. He gently pulled out a cloth and pressed it against her bleeding arm. Lena blinked. "Why are you helping me?" The boy looked up. His Arabic-accented English was hesitant, but his voice was steady. "Because my mother says, even enemies have hearts." She tried to sit up but winced in pain. Her vision spotted. He continued, "My name is Ismail." Then, looking straight into her eyes, he softly recited, "Whoever kills a soul unjustly, it is as if he had killed all of mankind." Lena stared at him, breath caught. "Why are you saying that to me?" she asked. Ismail hesitated, then whispered, "Because we don't hate you. We only hate what you were sent to do." The words pierced through her like bullets couldn't. He offered her a bottle of water. She drank slowly, hands trembling. Her heart, once trained to resist emotion, now beat with a strange ache, not from injury, but from the collision of truth and shame. From behind a nearby building, a faint voice echoed, calling, "Ismail, Habibi, where are you?" "That's my mother," he said. "But I'll help you first." Lena shook her head. "You should go." You don't know what I've done, Ismail simply replied. Maybe. But Allah knows your heart now. Not yesterday. She couldn't respond. He looked at her face one last time. Wait here. I'll bring someone to help, Lena whispered. Why do you care? The boy turned with a small smile. Because once, a soldier helped my sister. Not all uniforms are evil. Maybe yours just doesn't fit anymore. Then he ran. Lena leaned against the wall, eyes wide, the Quranic verse replaying in her mind. Her lips moved without sound. Her body hurt, but something inside her had been awakened. This child, in a land scorched by drones and politics, had given her more mercy than she had ever offered anyone. She looked up at the dim, smoky sky and whispered for the first time in her life, not to a government, not to a general, but to something unseen. If there's a God, maybe. I'm ready to listen. And in that moment, as the wind carried the smell of dust and ash, a new chapter in Lena Sharon's life began, not as a soldier of the state, but as a woman haunted by truth, and unknowingly guided by a child named Ismail. Lena sat in the shadows of a broken wall, her body numb, her mind unraveling. The wind carried distant sirens and the hum of a drone far above, but none of it seemed real anymore. All she could hear was the boy's voice echoing in her head. We don't hate you. We only hate what you were sent to do. She had never heard anyone, especially a child, speak like that. Not after seeing what her uniform represented. Not after what had just happened. She looked down at her arm, crudely bandaged with a cloth that smelled faintly of jasmine. The bleeding had slowed, but the deeper wound wasn't physical. Something inside her had ruptured. Footsteps approached. She tensed. Her right hand instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Then she saw him, Ismail, running back with an older woman dressed in a loose black robe, her face etched with both exhaustion and fierce compassion. This is her, Ismail whispered. The woman hesitated for a moment, taking in the insignia on Lena's uniform. Her eyes hardened, then softened again. Without a word, she knelt beside Lena and helped lift her up. Lena flinched, but didn't resist. Come, the woman said quietly. Quickly. Before anyone sees. Lena didn't ask where they were going. She couldn't. Her body was too weak, her thoughts too tangled. She leaned on the woman, half carried down a narrow alley that twisted between hollowed-out buildings and sandbagged storefronts. Finally, they stopped at what looked like a collapsed house. Ismail pushed aside a half-burned door, revealing a small passage that sloped downward beneath the rubble. They entered a tight, dark corridor. At the bottom was a hidden iron gate, camouflaged with broken furniture and sandbags. Ismail knocked softly in a rhythmic pattern. The gate opened. Behind it, a dimly lit basement revealed a small makeshift clinic, 2 cots, a metal table with medical supplies, and 3 people with worn, tired faces who looked up in alarm. One of them stepped forward, a man in his 50s with a graying beard and wire-rimmed glasses. Who is this? He demanded. She's wounded, the woman said. She needs help. The man looked at Lena. His eyes narrowed. She's Israeli. She's human, the woman replied firmly. Lena said nothing. She didn't have the strength to defend or explain herself. She barely had the strength to stay conscious. The man stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. Put her on the cot. I'll see what I can do. They laid her down gently. The man examined her arm with quick precision, cleaned the wound, and injected something to dull the pain. Lena winced, but didn't cry out. What's your name? He asked, not looking at her. She hesitated. Lena. He nodded. You were at the border building. It wasn't a question. She turned her head away, unable to speak. He didn't press. You should rest. You lost a lot of blood. As he moved away, Lena looked around. The clinic was primitive but clean. The others whispered in Arabic, occasionally glancing at her. Ismail sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, playing with a cracked rubber ball. He didn't seem afraid. In fact, he gave her a small smile when their eyes met. You'll be okay, he said. Uncle Fadil is the best doctor. Lena blinked. Is this place safe? Ismail tilted his head. No place is really safe. But this is where we save people. Even you. She didn't know how to respond. Over the next few hours, Lena drifted in and out of sleep. Fever came and went. She heard voices, the scratching of pens, the pouring of water, the cries of a baby somewhere above. But more than anything, she heard silence, the kind she never noticed before. The kind that wrapped around her not like a threat, but like a question. Why are you still alive? She dreamed of the explosion. Of her teammates' faces. Of the voice through the window. Make sure there are no survivors. That wasn't an enemy order. It had come from her own. The next morning, she awoke to the smell of bread and mint. Ismail sat beside her, offering a cup. It's tea, he said proudly. I made it. She took it with shaking hands. Thank you. You're welcome, he said. Then paused. You had a bad dream last night. She looked at him. You were here? I was worried you'd stop breathing. She didn't know why, but the words made her throat tighten. Later that day, Uncle Fadil returned with clean bandages and gave her a quiet nod of approval. You're healing. Slowly. She sat up for the first time, weak but conscious. I shouldn't be here, she murmured. Why not? He asked. Because I'm the enemy. Fadil shook his head. Enemies kill without thought. You're thinking. That makes you different. That night, Lena sat alone in the corner of the clinic, watching the flickering light bulbs sway above her. She listened to the soft murmur of prayer from the room beyond. It wasn't the first time she had heard Muslims pray, but this time, it didn't sound like noise from the other side of a checkpoint. It sounded peaceful. Human. Ismail came in and sat beside her. You look better, he said. Lena looked at him. Why are you being so kind? He shrugged. Because you looked like someone who needed it. She smiled faintly. You know, you might be braver than most soldiers I've ever known. He grinned. My mom says the bravest people are the ones who forgive. Lena looked away. Then I have a long way to go. Silence fell again, but this time it was gentle. Before leaving, Ismail reached into his bag and handed her a small, folded piece of paper. My favorite line, he said. She opened it. It was a handwritten verse translated in English. Do not despair of mercy. Even if the sky falls, God sees you. Lena didn't know if she believed in God. But in that moment, she believed in Ismail. And that was enough to take one more breath. One more step. Somewhere beneath the rubble, something inside her had survived, and now, it was beginning to feel again. The days passed slowly in the hidden clinic beneath the ruins. Time was marked not by clocks but by the arrival of bread, the humming of prayer, and the flickering of that lone hanging bulb. Lena's wounds were healing, but something deeper, older, had started to open inside her. She had stopped asking where she was. Not because she didn't care, but because for the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier on enemy ground. She felt like a stranger in her own story. Ismail came every day. Sometimes with tea, sometimes with bread, sometimes with nothing but quiet company. Lena noticed how he moved, careful but not fearful, always listening. He wasn't like any child she had ever known. He carried something older than his years, loss and patience woven into one. Why aren't you in school? She asked him one morning, as she peeled back the edge of her bandage. He shrugged. It was bombed last year. Then again a month ago. Mama says one day it will open again. Lena looked away, ashamed. Outside the clinic's main door, a narrow tunnel led to a small courtyard that had survived the air raids. It was mostly rubble and weeds, but every morning, an old woman named Samira would come and water a single flower pot. Just one, a cracked clay pot with a wild purple flower growing in it. Lena asked about it. Ismail smiled. She says as long as something still grows here, we're not lost. Lena didn't speak, but she watched the flower more carefully after that. One afternoon, she asked Fadil, the quiet doctor, if she could help clean the clinic. He didn't reply with words. He simply handed her a cloth and nodded. As she swept the floor, she noticed a series of books stacked in the corner. Not medical manuals. Not propaganda. Children's storybooks. Poetry. Something handwritten and bound in old string. She picked one up. It was titled, The Light Before Dawn. A collection of short stories written by a local teacher who had died in an airstrike. Inside were drawings made by children, poems about home, and pages covered in clumsy handwriting. It wasn't political. It wasn't angry. It was tender. On the last page, one line stood out. Even when the sky falls, we will still name our children after stars. Lena put the book down slowly. Her throat ached. That night, she sat alone in the courtyard, wrapped in a thin blanket. The moon was faint. The stars even fainter. But one voice was strong, the voice inside her that no longer sounded like a soldier. Ismail came and sat beside her. No words. Just presence. Your people, Lena said finally. You were never the enemy, were you? Ismail didn't answer right away. Then he said, Depends who you ask. But to us, we were always just people. Lena felt tears sting her eyes. She quickly blinked them away. I was taught something very different, she confessed. We were told you hate us. That you're dangerous. That you want us dead. He looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. Maybe that's what they needed you to believe so you could do what they wanted. That cut deeper than any shrapnel. Over the next few days, Lena insisted on helping around the clinic. She assisted Fadil in cleaning wounds, boiling cloths, comforting frightened children. No one trusted her at first. But no one stopped her either. It was during those days she heard the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, echo faintly through a crack in the ceiling. She had heard it many times before. In the army, it was just background noise. Enemy culture, they called it. But here, it wasn't noise. It was rhythm. Peace. A tether to something unseen. She watched how the others would stop, gently lay down what they were doing, and face the same direction in silence. It wasn't dramatic. It was humble. Unifying. One evening, Ismail came with a fresh scarf in his hands. He handed it to Lena. It's not for hiding, he said. It's just, maybe it helps. She looked at it. Simple. Soft. Pale gray. She hesitated, then wrapped it loosely over her head and shoulders. Not out of obligation. Not out of fear. Out of curiosity. And something she wasn't ready to name yet. When she looked in the cracked mirror in the clinic corner, she didn't see an Israeli soldier anymore. She didn't see an enemy or a uniform. She saw a woman who had survived something she couldn't explain. A woman reborn from betrayal, now learning how to breathe again. That night, she sat in the dark hallway beside Ismail, eating flatbread dipped in oil. Do you believe everyone can change? She asked him. He nodded without hesitation. Of course. What if they've hurt people? Believed in lies? Stayed silent while others were punished? Ismail looked at her carefully. My mama says, even the darkest water can become clear if the rain falls long enough. Lena smiled for the first time in days. Not a forced one. A real one. As if something had finally begun to melt. In the early morning, she walked into the courtyard where Samira still watered her flower. Without speaking, Lena knelt beside her and gently helped hold the cracked pot steady. Samira looked at her. You're not lost, she whispered. Lena didn't reply. She just nodded and held the flower still. The rain came softly that night, tapping on the broken beams above the hidden clinic. Lena sat by the door, wrapped in the pale gray scarf Ismail had given her, watching water drip through the cracks. She had stopped counting the days since the explosion. Time no longer felt like something measured in minutes or missions. It was now marked by feelings, by breaths that didn't carry guilt, and by the moments when silence didn't mean danger. She had changed. She knew it. But she also feared what came next. That evening, Fadil had handed her a worn copy of a translated Quran. He didn't force it on her. He simply placed it on her cot and said, Sometimes truth whispers. When you're ready, listen. Lena hadn't opened it yet. The book sat beside her like a question. Heavy. Waiting. The storm outside grew stronger. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, followed by the soft hum of a generator flickering back to life. The lights in the clinic glowed weakly. Lena turned toward the hallway and saw Ismail curled up asleep, using a folded blanket as a pillow. She stood and walked over, crouching beside him. His face was peaceful. so calm for someone who had lived through so much. Her own childhood had been filled with drills, speeches, and strict obedience. His was marked by bombs, blackouts, and a softness that refused to die. She reached out and gently adjusted the blanket on his shoulder. Then whispered, "You don't even know what you've done for me." Ismail stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Lena returned to her cot and stared at the Quran again. After a long moment, she picked it up. Her fingers hesitated on the cover before slowly turning the first page. The English text flowed across the page like quiet water. She didn't understand everything, but some verses felt like they had been written just for her. One passage stopped her breath. "Do not despair of the mercy of God. He forgives all sins. Indeed, it is He who is the forgiving, the merciful." She read it 3 times. Each word felt like balm over old wounds. Despair had been her only companion since that cursed mission. And yet here, buried in the pages of a book she had once been told to hate, was the first real hope she'd ever encountered. She set the book down, eyes glassy. That night she didn't sleep. At dawn, she rose quietly and performed the same motions she had seen others do before prayer. She washed her hands, her face, her feet, awkwardly, clumsily. Then she took a scarf, wrapped it tighter, and stood at the back of the room as Fadil and others lined up to pray. She didn't know the words, but she mimicked the actions. Bowing, prostrating, rising. When it was over, Fadil turned to her. She looked at him directly. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to be." He smiled gently. "Faith isn't a destination, Lena. It's a direction." Later that day, the hidden clinic received news. More buildings had been bombed near the center of Gaza. Fadil had to go. Volunteers were needed. Before he left, he took Lena aside. "You're healing well," he said. "You'll need to make a choice soon. About who you want to be when you walk out of here." Lena nodded. "I don't want to go back. To Israel? To that version of myself." Fadil's expression was kind, but serious. "Then bury her. And name who you are now." The words echoed. That night, she sat beside Ismail under a tarpaulin canopy as the rain returned. He was showing her a small notebook, drawings he had made of trees, clouds, his mother's face. "You're really good at this," she said, flipping through the pages. "I draw so I don't forget," he replied. "Bombs take everything. So I try to keep pieces." She grew quiet. Then said, "You kept me too, didn't you?" Ismail looked at her. "Yes," he said simply. They sat silently for a while. Then Lena asked, "If someone wanted to start again, to let go of everything they were told, would they need a new name?" Ismail thought. Then nodded. "I think, if someone's soul becomes new, it deserves a new name." Lena smiled sadly. "What name would you give someone like that?" He didn't hesitate. "Layla." "Why?" "Because in our stories, Layla is the girl who walks through the longest night, but finds the morning." Lena blinked, overcome. She whispered, "Layla." Ismail continued, "And maybe she could be called Layla bint Ismail. Like, you're my big sister now. And you came back to life through something I said." Lena, no Layla, stared at him, stunned. Something in her chest cracked wide open. That night she wrote it in the corner of her notebook. Layla bint Ismail. Not as fiction. Not as disguise. But as the name of her soul. The next morning, when Samira brought food, Layla greeted her with a gentle smile and introduced herself. "I'm not Lena anymore," she said. "My name is Layla. Layla bint Ismail." Samira didn't ask questions. She simply kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then may your new life be full of light, Layla." From that day forward, no one in the clinic called her by her old name. And Layla began to speak, not much, but enough. She learned how to say simple Arabic phrases. She helped the children with blankets and food. She even started reading the Quran aloud at night slowly, one line at a time. And every night, before she slept, she'd say a small prayer in English. "Guide me, even if I don't know how to ask." But peace was fragile. And time was running out. That afternoon, Fadil returned in a rush. He looked shaken. "They're asking questions," he said quietly. Someone saw her at the ruins. Rumors are spreading that one of the units survived. We may not have much time. Layla froze. Not in fear, but in resolve. I'll leave, she said. I won't endanger you. But Fadil shook his head. We'll help you get somewhere safe. She turned to Ismail. He looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. Will I see you again? He asked. She knelt down. You gave me my life, Ismail. You'll always be with me. Every time I say my name. He nodded, eyes misty. And for the first time, Layla hugged him, fully, tightly, as if trying to absorb the purity of his heart into her own. Before leaving, she returned to the courtyard. The purple flower was still blooming. She reached out and touched one petal, then whispered, I'm not walking away. I'm walking towards something new. As the sun began to set, she wrapped the gray scarf tighter around her head, picked up a small copy of the Quran, and stepped out of the clinic through the hidden tunnel. No longer Lena Sharon, soldier of war. Now she walked forward as Layla bint Ismail, daughter of mercy, witness of truth, and seeker of light. The border crossing into southern Lebanon wasn't a gate, it was a whisper between shadows. Fadil had arranged everything. A motorbike, 2 sets of clothes, forged papers, and a safe route through deserted olive groves under the fading moonlight. Layla sat behind the driver, her arms clutching the small pack that held the only 2 things she now owned, a tattered copy of the Quran and the notebook with her truth written inside. She didn't look back. If she did, she feared she'd never be able to move again. She was no longer escaping a place. She was walking away from a past, one made of steel, betrayal, and silence. By dawn, they had reached the foothills of southern Lebanon. Her contact, an aid worker named Sufyan, met her with a quiet nod. You are safe now, he said. But not invisible. Layla understood. The next weeks passed like a quiet breath. Sufyan took her to a small, hidden village high in the hills, a place with no road signs, no surveillance, no foreign eyes. There, in a guest house built from old stone, Layla began her new life. She told no one her story, not even the kind woman who brought her bread each morning, or the imam who welcomed her to the tiny mosque where she prayed in the back row, always silent. But inside she was speaking more than she ever had. Each verse she read from the Quran felt like another window opening inside her chest. She wept over lines she didn't fully understand, not because of their grammar, but because of their gravity. She wept when she read about Moses standing before Pharaoh. She wept when she read about Mary giving birth alone under a palm tree. And she shook when she read about those who were once blind but then saw. One evening, after Asr prayer, she sat on the steps of the mosque as children played nearby. A little girl tripped and scraped her knee. Layla quickly ran over and picked her up, brushing dust from her tiny hands. You okay? She asked in Arabic, her tongue still hesitant but learning. The girl nodded, staring at Layla's face. What's your name? She asked. Layla, she answered. Layla bint. Layla smiled. Bint Ismail. The girl giggled. Like my cousin. Layla laughed softly, then paused. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't pretending. She was becoming. That night she opened her notebook, the one filled with all her memories, doubts, and confessions. Page after page she had described the mission that had killed her unit, the voice that ordered the execution, and the deliberate silence that followed. But it wasn't just a record of crime. It was a letter to the world. A whisper from someone who once obeyed, and now had learned to disobey for the sake of truth. I wasn't a victim, she wrote. I was a believer in a lie. And now, I testify for the truth. She signed it again, Layla bint Ismail. Sufyan had contacts. Journalists. Editors from independent European outlets. Brave people who didn't flinch when governments growled. I know someone in Tripoli, he told her. He's published stories before. But once it goes out, you won't be hidden anymore. Layla nodded. I was hidden too long. The letter, along with a redacted version of her notebook, was delivered by a volunteer posing as a UN driver. It would take days, maybe weeks, to reach the hands that could spread it to the world. In the meantime, Layla stayed low. She spent her mornings reading, her afternoons helping in the village clinic, and her evenings walking under the stars. She taught a few children how to write their names in English. She taught herself how to recite Surah Al-Fatiha by heart. But the silence wouldn't last. One morning, as she hung washed clothes on a line behind the house, she heard the low hum of a vehicle that didn't belong. A black SUV, newer, cleaner, and quiet. Too quiet. She ducked behind the laundry. Her heart pounded. Two men stepped out. Foreign clothes. Cameras disguised as phones. They knocked on the neighbor's door, asking about a woman who arrived weeks ago, maybe European, quiet, religious. Layla slipped back inside, pulled her scarf tightly over her head, and grabbed her bag. The Quran. The notebook. That's all she needed. Sufyan met her on the back path. "We leave now," he said. They didn't run. They walked quickly, calmly, as if going to the market. The sun was still low. The hills were quiet. But the air had changed. They boarded a small pickup truck driven by an old man who said nothing. For hours, they followed winding roads into the deeper parts of the country. No GPS. No cell phone. Just memory and trust. By nightfall, they reached a farmhouse nestled between cedar trees. An old radio still worked in the corner. Sufyan turned it on. Static. Then news. A shocking leak has come from an anonymous source within the Israeli military, detailing a planned false flag operation on the Gaza border. The document includes logs, names, and one haunting statement: "Make sure there are no survivors." Layla's breath caught in her throat. The host continued. "Though the author remains unknown, the letter is signed only, Layla bint Ismail." Sufyan looked at her. It's begun. The world now knew. Not her full name. Not her face. But her truth. She stepped outside. The wind blew through the trees, cold but clean. She looked up at the stars, remembering the children in Gaza who used to name them from broken rooftops. And she whispered, "You can chase me. You can erase my past. But not this." That night she slept without fear. Not because danger had passed, but because she had nothing left to hide, and everything left to live for. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. The small farmhouse in northern Lebanon offered Layla no luxury, no promises of safety, only distance from the world that once claimed her. Yet in that stillness, her voice had already crossed oceans. International headlines echoed words she had only whispered into a notebook. Israeli soldier exposes state-sponsored false flag operation. Anonymous confession signed. Layla bint Ismail. Shocks global press. The Gaza truth. A soldier speaks from the ruins. She hadn't expected the world to care. But it did. Not all, of course. Some called it fake. Others branded it treason. But then came the real wave, letters, messages, videos, even prayers. Young women from Brazil, activists from Norway, Muslim converts in London, all saying the same thing. "We believe you. We see you. Your truth matters." One email stood out. It was from a woman named Joanna in New York. "I teach global ethics in college. We read your letter in class." Half the room cried. "You may never know our names, but we'll never forget yours." Layla held the letter to her chest. She felt like a ghost that the world had finally seen. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through olive leaves, Sufyan came with news. "They want to interview you," he said, holding up a tablet. "Live. Anonymous, voice distorted, but still, your words, your voice. You'd speak to millions." Layla hesitated. She had wanted to disappear. To live quietly, far from the pain. But was silence still a virtue when her voice had already sparked hope? That night, she sat alone under the stars with the Quran open on her lap. The same passage she had once stumbled upon returned like a thread. "Do not despair of God's mercy," she whispered. "I'm not despairing anymore. I'm ready." The interview aired 2 days later. The screen showed no face, only a black silhouette, a soft filtered voice. But the words were real, unshaken. "I was part of a system built on silence. I was trained to see others as threats, not people. And one day, the silence turned inward. We were sent to die, not in combat, but as pawns in a game to justify more war. I survived. And in the ruins I met a boy. His name was Ismail. He looked at me, broken and bleeding, and said, "We don't hate you. We hate the injustice." That was the moment I stopped being a soldier and started being human. The world responded. Some with rage, some with awe, but most with reflection. She had not said her old name. She had not shown her face. But she had told the truth. And the truth no longer needed a uniform to walk. Layla began receiving questions from journalists, scholars, peace activists. But she didn't return to hiding out of fear. She simply didn't want to become a symbol without substance. So she wrote essays, reflections, translations, small blog posts under the name Layla bint Ismail began to circulate. One was titled, "How I Learned to Pray Without Knowing the Words." Another, "The Flower in the Rubble." One post read, "To those living in countries that will never see war on their doorstep, please, don't wait for a bomb to learn how to ask why." In secret corners of the internet, she became a spiritual companion to thousands. And still, no one knew her face. Except one person. Ismail. They hadn't seen each other since her departure from Gaza, but messages found their way. Through Fadil. Through volunteers. Through hands that didn't need GPS to navigate truth. One evening, Sufyan handed her a small package wrapped in cloth. "It came through the old clinic route," he said. Inside was a notebook, Ismail's drawings. And on the last page, a message. "Layla bint Ismail. You're still my sister. And the flower you left behind still grows." Layla's hands trembled. Her eyes blurred. The flower. She had not thought of it for weeks. But there it was, drawn in purple ink, surrounded by stars. She whispered, "May Allah protect him." In time, Layla moved again. The farmhouse was no longer safe. Surveillance had picked up her signal. But she wasn't afraid. She had grown used to movement, like water, like breath. Her next shelter was a home for displaced women in the mountains. She taught English, helped cook, recited parts of the Quran each night, now from memory. And every Friday, she sat under a tree and wrote. One day, a little girl in the shelter asked her, "Why do you wear your scarf like that?" Layla smiled. "Because it feels like peace." The girl tilted her head. "Are you a teacher or a traveler?" Layla looked up at the sky. "Both." The girl leaned closer. "What's your real name?" Layla smiled wider this time. "Layla. Just Layla." She didn't need to say more. The rest was written in her walk, in her words, in the soft strength that now surrounded her like armor not made of steel, but of mercy. A year later, in a university lecture in Chicago, a professor displayed a slide. The Layla letters, an anonymous soldier's road to redemption. In the back of the classroom, a young Muslim woman wept quietly. She had once doubted her identity. Now Layla's voice gave her a map. In a prison in France, a man who had lost everything in war wrote Layla's name on the wall and whispered her prayer before sleeping. In Gaza, near the broken courtyard, a boy named Ismail watered a purple flower that still grew, whispering verses of mercy into the wind. Layla's face remained hidden. But her name lived like a pulse inside those who had ever been lost and found. Because in the end, she hadn't just defected from an army. She had defected from hatred, from blindness, from silence. And every breath she took as Layla bint Ismail became a testimony not of who she had been, but of who she chose to become.